What I want to do is explain to you the Allagash River from the beginning at the mouth to go to the Piscataquis County Line, where Aroostook and Piscataquis counties meet. That's at the end of Amsascus Lake. The reason why I've confined myself to that area is that is the area I'm familiar with. Whether we were at 9 Mile, we were still at Amsascus with the warden camps, back and forth, a lot of times from traveling up and down both the St. John River and the Allagash River. But in 1950, Dad was transferred to the Allagash district from Fort Kent to Amsascus was his district. And of course, you didn't have the road work that you have today. Everything was done by canoe and motor. And what I'm going to do is hopefully take you folks on a ride up the river, starting at Allagash Village, and we'll end up at the county lines. First, I want to thank Don for that wonderful introduction he gave. I also want to thank him for everything that you are going to be seeing, because I am technologically illiterate. Proudly so. And we're going to see how this all plays out as we go along the river. What I want to do is start with the North Woods River, the Northern Maine rivers. This is a photo of something that I did when I was doing Elder Hostel. And what I'd like to point out to you is that on the east side of the Mississippi River, there are only 4 rivers that flow north. 3 of them are here. We'll start with the southwest branch of the St. John Valley. That is the main artery as we go through. There's the northwest branch, and that goes into Baker Lake, going down the St. John River. And the reason why this is so important as it heads south to St. John, New Brunswick, every stick of wood from the 1850s was floating down the river along that St. John River. But then you had all of these tributaries. Again, the southwest, the northwest, the Big Black, the Little Black, the St. Francis River. Notice that the origin of all of these rivers are in Canada. Then we have the, I'm going to jump over to the Fish River chain all over in here, with Fish Lake going into Portage, Eagle Lake, all of these lakes in here, Long Lake, Eagle Lake, and into the St. John River. Notice that on Long Lake, how close it is to the St. John River, but the water that starts in Senegat flows through all of this and down into the Fish River. Now I'd like to go to the third river flowing north, and that is the Allagash River. That one comes down through here, goes all the way through the big lakes, and we end up down by Telos Lake. I'm going to cut us off right here at Amsascus, because that's the familiarity I had from my upbringing. Keep in mind that as we go through this, there's always going to be references from the Allagash River to the St. John River, 7 islands. From 7 islands, we're going into St. Bonfield. There's a connection between all of the lumber contractors in those days, where they had outreach camps on all of these rivers and all of their settlements. So we'll start with, first of all, I guess we'll start with my defining the St. John River. It was named in 1604 by Samuel de Champlain when he landed in Quebec City on St. John the Baptist Day. And the St. John River became known as the St. John River at that time. So now we're going to go to the beginning of the Allagash River. And at the beginning of the Allagash River, that is the Statue of Liberty for me. It invites everybody to the river to enjoy everything that you want in the outdoors. And Allagash itself started off with Indian name Allagash, and then it became Allagash, and then transferred to Allagash. I start there because right at the beginning of the river is my ancestry. My great-grandfather, Nizer Pelletier, came there in the 1850s. He bought the land that is known as Pelletier Point or Pelkey Point from a gentleman named Samuel Bolton. Now this Samuel Bolton, when you're in Allagash and you go by the Maine Forestry Department, there's a little cemetery there. That is called the Bolton Cemetery. Bolton actually had a farm on the opposite side of the river, and there's a small cemetery over there with 8 or 9 bodies. He sold the property known as Pelkey Point to my great-grandfather. And my great-grandfather raised a family of 10 kids there, 5 boys and 5 girls. And that result, one of those children was my grandfather, Thomas Pelletier. And he raised a family of 11 children. As we start up the Allagash River, Nizer Sr. was approached by the state to run a ferry boat. And he ran it for a few years, and then my grandfather, Tom, took over the ferry boat for another 33 years or so to cross the river from the west side to the east side. Then his children, he had 7 boys and 4 girls. My dad was the second oldest of the 11 children. So they often ran the ferry boats, and the ferry boat would run until 9 o'clock at night. Anytime in the mornings, 4 o'clock or so, but down to 9 o'clock at night. And then if somebody wanted to cross the river at that point in time, they could yell across. If they were heard, some of the boys would come down, cross the ferry for them, pick them up and bring them to the west side. Because the ferry boat was parked on the west side, sometimes some people were impatient, like some of us are sometimes, and they would actually swim across the river. But it was like waist deep or so. So, as far as I know, the last ferry that was used was in 1947, because that's when they built the first wooden bridge at the mouth of the Allagash River. 17 years later, they built their first concrete bridge. That was a single lane. And 17 years after that, they built the current bridge that's there now. Starting at the mouth of the Allagash River, there's a little bogan call it Pelletier Bogan, but I prefer to call it slab bogan. Some of my uncles, Uncle Albert, Uncle Leo, they had mills along the Bogan. And all of the slabs, the trash slabs and stuff would end up in the water. The sawdust would be blown in the water. And the good slabs were kept for firewood. And they sold their lumber out of town, really. I remember they were still there when I was a young kid because I used to work there with my cousins at the various mills. So we have Pilkey Bogan there, and what was nice about Pilkey Bogan for Grammy Edith was in the springtime you could catch some chub that weighed about 2 pounds, and she loved to make chowder. So we loved to catch all the chub we could for Grammy. So we're going to start up the river at this point, and we're going to go on the east side, as we start right at the beginning of the river right here. I see that there. I should stop and say, just before the beginning on the St. John River, there are 3 islands there. There's Hog Island, Gardner Island, and Wolf Island. Gardner Island was the first island that John Gardner, roughly in 1841, settled there. The water was spring high, so they moved to the high bank on the shore of the east side, where the school is now, or the community center. Also, Wolf Island was so named because there were several wolves back in those days. And for whatever reason, they apparently stayed on that island because the next island was Hog Island. And what do you suppose the wolf wants to be? So you have the 3 islands there. John Gardner was the one who settled there first. And then the other islands developed from the local names. Going up the east side, I got to get used to this technology, guys. Right here we have the John Casey Rapids, right there. There's a small rapids in there, and as the river goes up, it makes a very sharp bend back over to this part. I want you to remember Casey Rapids because this was settled by John Casey. He was married to one of John Gardner's daughters. They adopted a child by the name of Alvy Casey. You're going to hear a lot of Alvy Casey as we go through our river trip. So as the river makes a sharp bend and comes back over here, it comes over to the Nizer Pelletier Senior place. That's where Tyler Kelly lives today. That's where 2 Lunch is. That was a 3-story building at one time, and that was a motel, a hotel. That was for transients coming and going up both the St. John and the Allagash rivers. After the Nizer Pelletier place, we have let me get that there. The main Forest Service place right there. And then just above that, we have the Tom Gardner flats in there. And that brings us up to a straightaway, then the river turns this way and comes over here. Now, the reason why I'm making these turns for you, and we're going to be going up and doing this as we go through. I want to talk to you about a Wongan boat, which was normally called a towboat. Wongan boat was basically 65 feet long. 14 feet wide on the front, 12 feet wide on the stern. It was being pulled by usually a team of horses. And the man on riding the horse was called a horsefly. The horses were shod with horseshoes that were malleable to walk on the rocks on the bottom of the river. Tied to the team of horses was the towboat with roughly a 200 to 300 foot, 1 inch long rope. The rope was secured to the front of the boat. In the middle of the boat, there was a pole. The pole was called a hillyard pole. And there was a line, the ropes that attached to the cabin went up to the top of the hillyard pole, went down to the front of the towboat, connected to the rope that the horses were pulling. That was called a hillyard rope. Roughly 4 to 8 men, depending on the size of the boat, because some of them were only 40 feet long, but the same dimension, 14 feet down to 12 feet wide. There was a cabin on the boat. The cabin had 2 bunks. There was a cook stove in there, and there was a cook. It would take them roughly 2 days to get to the Allagash Falls. Then they'd turn around and they'd come back down. But to get to the falls, they had to follow all these twists and turns. The men actually got in the river with horses and scoops, and scooped or dredged the river roughly 40 feet wide, and they put the big boulders up on the side so that this Wangan boat could be pulled by the team of horses following the current as it was going upstream. And then in the springtime, some of the rocks got pushed back into the channel, so the men would scoop it up again. The Wangan boat was used in our area from the early 1800s to about 1930. But, thank you, predominantly, on the Allagash, it was more like in 1870 when they hit the Allagash, but they were used elsewhere. So as we go up the river, we're going to be following that channel. I remember it very well. It was a good way to learn how to read the flow of a current in the river so that your motor wouldn't be hitting bottom or whatever. So that was the river craft that we had. We had the Wangan boat, we had the ferry boat, and then we also had the bateau. And the bateau was used extensively on all river drives, regardless of river. And it was to carry men back and forth to the different log jams, to the different camps along the way. And then even when they weren't used in log drives, in the fall of the year, where Grampy's ferry boat was, they'd use the bateau to cross the river with the ice flows and stuff. It usually took 2 men to handle one of those, roughly 20 foot long, tapered on both ends. Hardwood bottoms, so that either the logs or the ice would not affect their demise. Built with 3 planks high on the sides, and also to shuttle food back and forth to all of the different crews that were working along the river. They also had a houseboat, but a houseboat on the Allagash was rare. If there was any, it would have been from the Allagash Falls down. Up above, there were too many camps and depots where men could stay overnight. So then the houseboat, the last houseboat I ever saw was in 1961 on the St. John River. It was an Irving drive. And my brothers worked on that drive. They call that dragging the rear, picking up the rear. And they were picking up all of the loose logs that had gone ashore or stayed with the ice or whatever. And they'd roll those into the river, and the houseboat would feed them. That would be a place for them to stay at night and change their clothes and so on and so forth. So that pretty well took care of the ice boats, the houseboats. And the last, of course, is a canoe. So we're going to jump in the canoe because we've already gone part way. I want you to put your life jackets on. Back in those days, there was no life jackets. That didn't come into vogue until 1967 as a state law. I know because my brother caught 10 people that day on Fallbrook Lake. Okay, so I want you to be in the canoe with me, and we're going to go catch up where we were, and we're going to do a ride along. And I'll describe what we're coming to and where we're going, and we'll see how that takes us. So I think I stopped at Tom Gardner Flats, and that would be just about right around there. And then we have a little brook that puts out there. It's called Ross Brook, for no name in particular, but I'm going to come back to Ross. There was a family of Rosses in St. Francis, but I can't verify that brook was named for them. Across the river from there, we have what they call Bugshack Brook. Bugshack Brook was so named because as we're currently hit in the modern day with spruce budworm and stuff, this was in the 20s. They had a little fly called a sawfly that was eating the spruce trees. And the sawfly would crawl out on the limbs and eat the buds and stuff, turn itself into a cocoon, drop a line down and go on the ground and turn into a solid piece about the size of a raisin. The state hired the local kids, as far as I'm concerned, and gave them Vienna sausage cans. They started at the Allagash Inn, which we'll get to the confluence. The Allagash Inn is right about there. They started from there, coming down on both sides of the river, picking those little cocoons on the ground. They'd lay right on the ground and pick that and fill a Vienna sausage can during the course of the day. For their effort, they got $3. If they had a canoe and motor to transport them, they got an extra $1. So that was big money for those days. It would take them roughly a day to fill one can. And oftentimes they cheated too and shared different things. The next place is Eliza Hole, right here. And the derivative of Eliza Hole comes in 3 different ways. First way is, according to Albert O'Leary, a woman had been engaged as she was working at the Allagash Inn, and the wedding broke off. And she became despondent and went down there and drowned herself. So poor Eliza had a hole named after her. The second is Gladys O'Leary Elbert's wife says, no, that's not true. There was a horse that drowned there. And the horse's name was Eliza. And Roland Susie says, that's not true either. He said, there was a guy by the name Eliza, and his famous or favorite fishing hole was right there. So it's Eliza's fishing hole. So that's the derivative of the Eliza hole. There's a small rips right next to it as well. After Eliza's hole, we'll go to the Allagash Inn. And that's right about there. And I don't see that clearly, so I'm checking here to make sure I'm at the right place. So the Allagash Inn, Cunliffe Depot, Bill Cunliffe. He built that as a motel for his workers coming and going. Keep in mind that in those days, either you canoed somewhere or you walked somewhere. And most of the time, you walked somewhere. So the men going to and from all of his different outfits started there. That's roughly a mile and a half, 2 miles from the mouth of the Allagash River. To room and board there overnight cost $1 a night. Bill Cunliffe sold it to people who were working for him. And then it was after the Second World War, a guy by the name of Clifford Brundle owned it, and he closed it down as a motel, and it's no longer there. It's been removed. Bill Cunliffe, to share with you, also built the big building that used to be near the International Bridge here in Fort Kent, which used to be the Masonic Lodge. That belonged to the Bill Cunliffe family. And that's another one of his holdings over there. Now, as we leave there, a lot of times the horses would follow the road from Allagash and come up to the inn, and there was 2 sheds there with teams of horses. Wagon boats probably would stop right there. Sometimes, as they were bringing the materials for the lumber camps up the river, the horse and buggy would cross the ferry at Grampy's and keep on going up and load or unload their stuff onto a wagon boat there. And that's why they had some hovels and sheds and teams of horses there. The wagon boat normally held anywhere from 8 to 10 ton, and bringing all kinds of flour, molasses, big barrels of stuff, even hay in some places from one place to another. Bill Cunliffe is the first, J.T. Michaud. I said Cunliffe, huh? It's J.T. Michaud that had that in. J.T. Michaud had his own boats. There were as many as 18 to 20 wagon boats on the Allagash River. The different contractors had their own boats. So once we leave the inn over here, we've got ourselves a little bit of a rapids right here, and to the right over here is called a gauge house. The National Geographic Survey used to monitor the river flows on the Allagash River and monitor the material in the water and take tests for different things. Roy Gardner became their spokesperson, and he did a lot of running around, and there was a gauge house right there. And in the spring of '52, the ice damaged the gate house. And I remember going with my grandfather and repairing it with the cement blocks around that building and stuff. Just above the gauge house, there's a line that goes across the river right there, and that was a little trolley. They had a wire going across, and the trolley would go into the middle of the river, and they would drop. I remember seeing bombs about this big. They were shaped like bombs, and drop them at 10-foot intervals as they went across the river, and monitor whatever chemical, speed of water, all this stuff, and then they'd go and record that in the gauge house. Today, there are seismic implants all around the foot of the what used to be the support system for the trolley. I don't know if it's still there, but this is connected with the Boston outfit, and they read daily recordings of seismic readings in our area at that particular place. As we go on up, we go to 3 Mile Island right here, and that is so named. That's at one time, up until the 1980s, the road used to follow the river. And then Pell and Pell on the farm road made a bypass, and it came back to where the gatehouse was on the 3 Mile Island side. Good place for picking fiddleheads. Just above 3 Mile Island, that dashed line is a temporary ice bridge. In the wintertime, my uncles with their 10-wheelers would cut on this side and bring the load across the ice onto the main road, which we call the farm road, going up through this way. After that, we come to Gerald Brook. I skipped Gerald Brook. Gerald Brook is right over here. And there's going to be another Gerald Brook. So when I get to the other one, I'll tell you more about the Gerald family. Above that, we have Two Brook Island, and then we have two brooks, the east side and the west side. The east side, there wasn't too much that could be done. It was a smaller brook, although way over here there was a little pond that fed the water there. A nice great big rapids right in there, right above the Two Brook Island right here. West Twin Brook was very big, and it had a south branch and it had a north branch, and there was a lot of log driving on West Twin Brook. There were a lot of dams that were built on it to be able to float their logs down. I might add, as a young kid, it was a terrific place for fishing. And back then, just so you think I'm not breaking the law, it was a 15 fish limit. So with 4 boys, that's 60 trout. That was a good meal. After we leave Two Brooks, we're going to go to Ghost Landing Bar, right over here. And Ghost Landing Bar, there was a logger who felled a big pine tree. And he was able to get it out to the river. But there wasn't enough water to float it. And they found that there was a heart in the center of that big pine. And he cried about it because it just wasn't, he wasn't happy, excuse me, that he couldn't float his log out. And he died there. I never knew of any name that he had, first name or whatever, or wherever he lived. Right after Ghost Landing Bar, we come to Depot and Spring Bank right in here. Spring Bank is cold bank, and Depot Brook comes out there. Now, the word depot is used extensively along the Allagash River because a depot is a central place for storing goods. Somebody might have been cutting in the woods to the east side, so the Wangan boat, as they're going up, it's like a delivery truck, UPS or FedEx. Let's drop some their stuff off here. So they built sheds along the river, and they would drop that off according to who the supplies were going to. After Depot Brook, there's a small brook called Fish Brook up in there, and then we come to McGargle Rock, and McGargle Rock is right over here. And the McGargle Rock is named for a guy who was trying to break up a log jam, and he lost his life as the jam let go. When a log jam starts anywhere on the river, the log that starts the jam is called a gill poke. And a gill poke, in reference to people, is people who are ornery or don't get along with you. I've been called a gill poke many times. Our father used it freely. If we did something wrong with a pole and paddle, you're a gill poke. After we go to the gill poke, there's Neil Shed Brook. Now, I don't know why they call it Neil Shed Brook. I don't know if there was a guy by the name of Neil, or if Neil had a shed, or whatever. But it's called Neil Shed Brook. It's just a small brook that puts out over there. Across from that, there is another little brook called Fish Brook. And Fish Brook has no origin name other than probably there must have been some fish there. As we go on up, we come to Big Brook. Now, Big Brook is a very, very close thing to my family. When Dad got transferred, even though it was part of his territory, when he had the Allagash district, the St. Francis district up to Amzaskis, Big Brook became part of his place, and we have a lot of relationship with family living there and stuff. My nephew Tom has a camp a mile up from the Big Brook, and there's a lot of stories I can tell you about Big Brook. I'll come back if you're interested in hunting. There's some salt licks over there, and the crevices are about a foot deep. You can actually walk in them, and that was a good place for warden service to meet a few people along the way. I will probably definitely come back to Big Brook. Then we got Big Brook Island over here, and then we have McKean Brook. McKean Brook was established by two brothers, Lewis and Charles McKean, I believe originally from the Mars Hill area. And they had a set of logging camps. Across from McKean Brook Island, McKean Brook itself, there's an island there that I called Wyman Island. The reason why I call that instead of McKean Brook Island is because the actress Jane Wyman was coming down the Allagash River at one point back in the 50s. There were too many people at the Allagash Falls, and she was embarrassed to use an open outhouse. There was no privies back then. So she held it until she got down the river, and she asked the guide, please put me ashore over here so I can use the facilities. And as she went ashore and did her thing, some moose owners were heading up the river, and they knew what she was up to. So among our local people, we call that the Wyman Island. After the Wyman Island, we come to a settlement over here. Bella and Pelletier from Fort Kent here. My grandfather, Tom. There was a lot of buildings going on. I was talking to Aunt Albertine. She was talking about when she was 4 years old living there in the wintertime. Can you imagine these young kids in the woods like that, and no running water, no indoor plumbing and stuff like that? And it's unbelievable that they lived there not year round. They come home in the springtime. And just above that is the other Gerald Brook that I was talking about. Now, how come we have two brooks named Gerald Brook? One here and one there. In my readings over 50 years, there was a Gerald who was a very big contractor that contracted between Long Lake Dam and the St. John River to Seven Islands. He had an outreach at Seven Islands. He had an outreach in Allagash. He had an outreach up at the Allagash Falls. Even though Bella and Grampy Tom were cutting poles or logs or whatever, they were subcontracting to other contractors, the big contractors. So it's my suspicion that these two brooks were named after Gerald Brook. After that, we come to the Allagash Falls. My God, what can we say about the Allagash Falls? There is a lot to say. When you go to shore, when us four boys were traveling with Dad, we usually had two canoes. The boys would start carrying things from the landing to the upper landing at the falls on the trail. My job, being the baby of the family, was to make a spunhungan. And a spunhungan is nothing more than a rock fireplace built up in rocks. The derivative of spunhungan comes from the old timers who would make a fireplace, grab a branch and bring it over the fireplace to boil the kettle. That was called a sprung hung one, which then became spunhungan. At the end, and the pole that they brought down was called a load pole. And some of you have fireplaces where you might have two verticals with a pipe going across. That's your load pole, because that's what you hang your kettle on to heat the water. The drink of choice back in those days, tea. Tea. So you get your I'd get my water boiling while they're doing the work, carrying the canoes and our wangan, if you will, our supplies, up to the lower landing on the falls. So things would get ready, we'd have our little snack, and then we'd head on up and get up to the head of the falls. There was a choice. You could go to on the top of the falls, there were two landings. First one is closest, is only a couple 100 feet from the head of the falls. The other one is probably 500 feet up the river, and then it flows nice into the water at that point. The falls, I'm telling you, the danger in coming into the lower landing is where I don't go anymore. I take the upper landing, and it's easier to carry the canoe 500 feet than take a chance going down to the lower landing. We had the fright of God one time with my father and Gary on the trip, and as we turned to go into the lower landing, the motor conked out, and my father grabbed the canoe pole, and with his strength, that's the only thing that got us back. We got close enough to shore. Gary jumped out with a rope and brought us up to the lower landing. I think the stern of the canoe was over the falls, but I can't vouch for that. So that's why I never went back. At the falls, the Wangan boat could come ashore. There were some Wangan boats would only travel from Allagash Village to the falls. I'm going to speed up a little bit. So they corduroyed the trail so that when the Wangan boat got there, if it was not going over the falls on the upper side, they would have a horse and buggy there, because there was like 10 families that lived at the falls. They would load it on that horse and buggy and bring it up to the other Wangan boat. Usually the upper Wangan boat was at the upper landing at the head of the falls. If they wanted to pull the Wangan boat up, they corduroyed logs all the way up through. And there was a series of 3 ring pins. And so they'd take the tow rope for the boat, pass it up through a ring pin, take the team of horses, the horses would walk down the hill, the boat would go up. They'd secure it, take the rope, go to the next ring pin, bring the team of horses up, they'd walk down, and that's the way they got that boat up over the falls, loaded. Now, I forgot to mention too, the draft on a big boat like that was only 8 inches or so. It was not a big draft. The surface area is what kept it floating. Okay.
Allagash Falls.
Allagash Falls. I'm going to go to Widow Blanche right off. We're going to remember her too in our travels. I don't know why she's called a widow. She was of Indian background. She lived there. She had 12 or 13 kids. She apparently slept with many men, and one of them she gave away. His name was Alvy Casey. Casey Rapids at the beginning. John Casey adopted him. Alvy Casey raised the family. His son, Walter, married my aunt. So there's a little bit of a connection there. But we're going to come back to Widow Blanche. There's a mystery that you're all going to help me solve. Okay, so now we go to the Moore O'Leary farm. They're the first settlement. George Moore is the first one that settled there in the 1840s, 1850s, and raised families there. And then they were married into the O'Leary family, and they built a pretty good house right there. And the Moores had a house, let's say down over here. The O'Learys had a house here. The Moores had a house over here. And then Henry Taylor bought into this. This is all one group. It's the same place. Everybody calls it the Taylor Farms and the Taylor Place. But the origin was the O'Leary Moors. And we don't say enough about them. But then we're going to keep on going and come into the Taylor Islands, what we call the Taylor Islands. There's 13 of them. Probably the world's best place to pick fiddleheads. Henry and Alice were very close friends. We used to barter with them, go down and pick eggs for Alice, and she'd make us some good sweets and stuff. And then we'd bring in the hay for Henry and whatnot after he cut it. After the Taylor Islands, we're going to go to Little McKinnon Brook. That's named after a McKinnon family. And then right in there, just above the Little McKinnon Brook, there was a dilapidated Wongan boat that was left there. We used to stop and play there on the boat with kids, play pretend. Then we come to Finley Bogan, named for Finley McClellan. The McClellan family is well known in the Fort Kent area. The McClellan that used to own the dress shop on Main Street in Fort Kent is a child of Finley McClellan's. That's where she comes from. And then where the current Masonic Lodge is today, McClellan also, she moved her dress shop up there at one time. So there's a connection there with those families. Finley Bogan is a beautiful place to put in to access the Allagash River, usually to bypass the falls a lot of times. You can drive to it, put in at the Bogan, and come down river. Then we got the J.T. Michaud farm over here. And J.T. is the oldest of 22 kids. He inherited the farm from his father, Michael Michaud, who came there after the Aroostook War in the 1840s. And then he raised his family there. J.T., the youngest of the family, is T.T. Michaud. He was brought up, or he lived in Wallagrass, and Michaud Hill, where I live, is named after T.T. Michaud. So there's an origin, and this J.T. Michaud was also called One-Eye Joe. At the age of 17, he was on a log drive, and he was riding a log down the stream, came into a fast bank, and branch hit him in the eye. And the other thing about JT, he was quite a womanizer. He had 3 different women, and he was still looking for more. He had a house in Holton. Holton was the hub of all of the forest industry back in those days. It's unbelievable how all of these people we're talking about have a connection to Holton. So a lot of times his wives would go stay in the wintertime in Holton at that house. Next we come to the Gel Bear. I got to get used to this. The Gel Bear homestead. That was Sam and Willard Gelbear's father. There was like 12 kids that were born there, and Willard Sr. and Sam Gelbear were brought up there, and there were 2 children that were buried there, which I had an interview with Betty Pecoraro in 2018. It's the first time, as long as I lived there, that I had ever heard that there was 2 children born there, a boy 4 years old and a girl at stillbirth. After the Gelbear homestead, we take a nice quick trip over towards Ramsey Ledge. Ramsey Ledge is named after Charles Ramsey, who was born in the Fort Kent blockhouse. And he became a tower man for the Round Pond Towers. And then right across from there is the Ramsey Islands. There's two little ones. And right in here is the Ramsey Brook campground. One of the nicest spots anybody can want to stay on for a couple of nights there. It's a beautiful place. And part of Ramsey Ledge, there's Ramsey Brook that comes out right there. Part of Ramsey Brook also comes out at Cunliffe Depot. There's a finger of the brook that comes out there, very small stream. After Ramsey Ledge, we have the Dow McKeel area. The Dow camp was built roughly in the 1930s by Harold Hal Dow, whose father Levi Dow was also a game warden. And he built that camp, and that's where we stayed for 10 summers, my 3 older brothers and myself. We had all kinds of guests coming and going. The men on the fire tower taking their breaks and stuff, going up the river. The gel bears would stop in and check on us. Even though we lived alone, we had great times together. And that's where we had a lot of fun doing all kinds of odds and ends, playing practical jokes on one another. And then the other thing, the reason why I got McKeel there is Joe McKeel's grave was buried there. And the tote road actually passed right in front of the camp, right off the camp porch. And he was buried supposedly in the middle of that tote road. Why he was buried right there, I don't know. But the significance there is that when he died, he was a keeper for the Cunliffe Farm Depot. And he always wanted to be buried there. So they buried him in 2 pork barrels. Now we have some stories that it was Willard Rideout. Willard Rideout had a camp right across the river from the depot right here, about 200 feet away from the riverbank. He was kind of a weirdo guy. But he also manned the tower at Round Pond. But they claim that Rideout is the one that buried Joe McKeel in 2 pork barrels. Some say 2 sugar barrels. Some say 2 flour barrels. Take whatever barrels you want. They put the 2 barrels together, they wrapped him in clothing and buried him. But then Dan O'Leary of the O'Leary farm, he is supposed to have buried Joe McKeel as well. And Trevor O'Leary writes a good story about that. I have the copy of it from the Bangor Daily. And then, too, it's barrels, but again, whichever kind of barrels. Joe McKeel, I did find out that he was born in 1800 in New Brunswick, Kingstown, New Brunswick, I believe. And he was married, he had 6 kids. And then, for some reason or other, he ended up at the Cunliffe Depot right here. And he took care of the groundwork over there. And his kids came to get him at one point in time, and he didn't want to go. So he stayed there, and he died there, and he's buried there. And we had made a cross for him. And there's arguments as to exactly where is his death place, but at any rate, we know he's buried somewhere there. Okay, so we're at Cunliffe Depot. Cunliffe Depot, that is really unbelievable, with a steam log hauler and a gas log hauler. I have a film, 1911, with the log haulers working and crossing the river and getting stuck in the river and stuff like that. They used to build bridges in the ice, corduroy logs across, freeze them, draw a lot of water, freeze them, and then they'd cross. And then there's a little island right here, and there's no name to that island, which is curious to me because it's right in front of the depot, but there is an island upriver that's called the Depot Island. Over here, we have shallow rapids, and I put there that's Woodstove Rapids. When Bob Gelbear was building halfway camp at Burnt Land Campground, he had two of his Boy Scouts, David Hart and Bob Burby, volunteer to bring a stove from Michaud Farm up to Burnt Land. And they adjusted the stove in the canoe, and when they got there, because of the fast water, the shallow water, probably the prop got stuck in the gravel or whatever, they flipped. And eventually they were able to get the stove back in the canoe, and they called it Woodstove Rapids. So that's what I've called it on their behalf. Right on the shoreline of Stove Rapids, there too was a Wongan boat, was deteriorated. We used to go there, and as kids you play all the time, and we'd make believe we were the sweepster, the guy running the rudder, and someone would be the boatsman or whatever. We had a lot of fun with that. Eventually the ice took it away. Just above that, there is an ice bridge that was sanctioned by Seven Islands Land Company in 1981 to 1984, and that's where they trucked their wood from the east side to the west side. And of course, back in those days, they didn't have the big tractor trailer trucks that they have today. It was all done by 10-wheelers. Above Bass Brook, or at Bass Brook, we're not sure about the name of that. Some of the books I've read said it's because there was bass fish, but there's no bass fish in the Allagash tributaries that I know of. And what I have come across is that there was Samuel Michaud, who was a peddler selling fish. And back in those days, on Fridays, the Catholics were eating fish as an attempt at some form of penance. So he was selling all kinds of fish. Le marou salé, as they say in French, the salt cod, whatever fish was available. Sam was called big fish and Dona was called little fish. Then we have right above that is the Burnt Land halfway camp that Bob Gelbear frequented. The reason why it's called Burnt Land is that there was a big forest fire over in this area at one time. Now we're going to go back across the river here, and Ben Glacier Brook, that's named after Ben Glacier and his brother Vin and John and Joe, and there was a bunch of them. Ben Glacier is the origination of Glacier Lake. They had outreach camp over there. Just like Ben Glacier, Bill Cunliffe, J.T. Michaud, anything you can think of in the northern country, they had an outreach camp. And then other people that we name brooks after and stuff are the people who are cutting and subcontracting for them. So now we come to Ben Glacier, and I'll go up the west side a little bit. We got Big McKinnon Brook over here, and we have Bogan Brook. Self-explanatory. This is McKinnon for the McKinnon family down by the Taylor Farms. We're at Pelletier Deadwater, and there's 3 islands over here called Pelletier Deadwaters on some maps. And I'm confused because it's Pelletier. Nobody in my family knows why that's called Pelletier. I've been inquiring for 20 years Nobody knows why it's called Pelletier. I'll tell you the reason. Just above where I'm going over here is Piscataquis Deadwaters. Piscataquis Deadwaters is 6 miles long. I think that's the foot of Piscataquis Deadwaters, because we never talked about Pelletier Deadwaters. Okay, then we'll move up to Five Finger Brook. It speaks for itself. That's 5 little streams, one main stream that fingers out into the Allagash River. The only brook out of the 5 fingers that is named is Sinclair Brook. And those Sinclairs originally were in the St. Francis area in the 1840s, of which John Sinclair, to throw out a name, would have been an ancestry to that. So we got Five Finger Brook. Over here we got Savage Brook. The only thing, there were a number of savages that lived in the Fort Kent area. I really can't tell too much about who that brook or what that brook would be named after. Then we have Hosey Buck. That is a very historical spot. Hosey B took over land ownership from the Pingriers at one time with Ebenezer Co. And he was the first commissioner in 1909 for the Maine Forestry Department. And he is the one who eventually started in 1911 all the way through the entire tower system for the state of Maine for fire suppression. Before that time, fire suppression was handled by canoe and motors, or canoe and pole, because some didn't have the motors in the earlier days. And they would canoe the Allagash looking for smoke or whatever and whatnot. So he started these fire towers, and they built a camp there around 1922 called Hosea B. And very quickly, very long story about him, but I need to pay tribute to him at some point. In the 1920s, he also became an advisor on the University of Maine of Orono System Board of Forestry. He donated $400,000 to the university. He built a camp down there on 25 acres of land that he gave to the forestry department. And I got this information from David Smith from Hamden, who called me to find out about Hosey Buck. And he was telling me this thing, they were celebrating X number of years, an anniversary, honoring Hosea B. And that's the information that he gave to me about 10 years ago. But there's still an awful lot to say about the gentleman. I want to honor him for his service and what he did. Ironically, I'll quickly just say that in 1972, the camp that he had built was burned by the Maine Forestry Department. What a sad story. Okay, moving on up. We're going to go Piscataquis Stream. That's the outlet of the 5 Piscataquis Lakes. And I've got Rosie's Rock written in there. Right at the mouth of the stream, there was a rock. Rosie was the wife of a caretaker of one of the towers at Piscataquis Deadwaters. That tower was built in roughly 1822. It was transferred to Round Pond in the 1840s. So it's going to end up in a different place, same tower. And then we have Moose Bogan, which speaks for itself. We talk a lot about a lot of moose these days and stuff. That's the place I saw my very first moose. And Faye O'Leary also writes that that's the first place she ever saw a moose. There was a lot of moose in the early 1900s, and they even had a moose season back then. But they had to terminate it because of the lack of moose. And now we've regenerated and the moose population has picked up. Across from it's Croak Brook. Gary said it was because there was a woodcutter there that was working for a crook, and he didn't have a good place to cut. He didn't have a good area to make some money, and so he was called a crook. But actually, Croak Brook is a derivative French word from France, crook. And the crook, what happens at Croak Brook is that the river is coming north and it makes a very sharp turn south, and then it cuts back into the Piscataquis Deadwater. So it makes like a hook, and a hook in French is a crook. So that's how come that one got named. Now, Mr. Chase, I have no idea, nothing in any readings about him. Schedule Brook, yeah, we got a lot about Schedule Brook. It's a place where there was log jams all the time. And if there was a log jam, it could even hold the log drive up as much as 2 to 3 weeks. That's why it would interrupt anybody's schedule. So it was called Schedule Brook. After Schedule Brook, we go across to Cedar Island, only because on the shoreline over here, there's a lot of cedar trees. And then we get to Turk Island, just the outlet of Round Pond. And Turk Island is named for a horse that drowned there, and it was Wild Joe Gelbear, who was the horsefly on the team of horses, and they had been hauling all day a Wangan boat, and they were tired. It was getting towards dusk. They were in a hurry to get into Round Pond, and they took the turn towards Turk Island a little bit too low, and the current got a hold of them, pulled them in. Wild Joe jumped off, grabbed his knife, and in the water he cut the reins off one of the horses. He wasn't able to get to Turk, the horse named Turk, and they left things there for that night. They finally went into Round Pond and went back the next day, and they found Turk's body below the island, and they were able to get the Wangan boat out and stuff. Now, the Pelletier Deadwaters, when, like I say, to me it's the Piscataquis Deadwaters. When the Wangan boat would get here, because of the deadwaters and the depth, they would load the horses on the Wangan boat, and the men would pole the boat up to Moose Bogan, and then put the horses ashore, and then pull that up in through Turk Island and the other places. We're down to Round Pond. There's Turk Island, and we're at Round Pond. They did the same thing on Round Pond while I was talking about it. When they get to the inlet, or the outlet, they'd load the horses and then they'd pull up along the shore to the inlet over here. Sometimes they'd put a sail on the Hillyard pole so that the wind would be able to take them, because it's a windy spot. There's a lot of things to be said about Round Pond. Sam Gelbear had a set of camps over here, guiding camps. The game warden camp was over here. There's a little bogan that puts in over this way. On the right hand side, we have going up, we have Maine Forestry building after they moved from Piscataquis Deadwaters. Tom McHugh is one of the owners that I remember there. And so they had the forestry building right there. Then they had, in here was Windy Point. That's where the Gelbears have their sporting camps. They had 5 sporting camps there. They had 2 down at Burnt Land, and then 2 further up at another spot here at Whitaker Brook. Then we've got the squirrel pocket is up in this corner of Round Pond, and the wind over there would often blow the logs into that pocket. It was a hard place on the log drives. So quickly, I'm going to tell you what happens right in there, and also at the Allagash Falls. Because the logs would end up from the inlet comes in this way, and the squirrel pocket sits over here. The gel bear camps here is like a point that jettisons out. The logs would get in back of that. So they built some piers right in the middle of the pond. Those are called sheer boom piers. And something about booms, there are three types of booms. There's a fin boom, the most common one that was used on the river. On the Allagash River between Amzaskus Lake and the village, there was as many as 35 to 40 fin booms. The fin booms were a series of logs tied end to end with a boom chain, and they floated freely in the current of the water, directing the logs into the mainstream, into the fast current. Sometimes, maybe after 10 logs down, they'd build a wing, put a board out with a brace to that floating log, and that would wing it to keep it into that area. So most of the booms that were ever seen by so many of us, those were called fin booms. Then they had a sheer boom. A sheer boom was used at the Allagash Falls. Sheer boom was used in Round Pond. Sheer booms, when you go to Van Buren, you see all those pillars in the middle of the river. Those are sheer booms. And what a sheer boom was called that way because a sheer boom itself, not the pier, was the same thing, a series of logs, usually 25 to 30 logs tied together, tethered together, and they were attached to the sheer pier, making a complete circle and coming back to the pier. And that served like a double whammy in some spots. So that's what happened at Squirrel Pocket in Round Pond, is they built those piers and then they'd have a series of sheer booms so that the logs coming down the river had less advantage of getting into the pocket and holding up the jam. So then the third type is called a Bathurst boom. And a Bathurst boom is very similar to a sheer boom. It's complete circle end to end, and that's usually used around the mills, the landing areas, or with a windlass, because they did use a windlass also on Round Pond. The Bathurst boom was squared logs rather than round logs, because its intention was to keep the log inside. It could not roll out over current or water like that. So it gave more security, and that was called the Bathurst boom. There was about 8 Bathurst booms on the Allagash. There were probably 20 to 24 sheer booms on the Allagash. Okay, where does that bring us?
Henderson Bridge.
Henderson Brook Bridge. Oh,
Down.
whoop, down. Oh, we moved. Okay, Henderson Brook Bridge. That's the brook, then the Henderson Brook Bridge. That's a nice place to put in if you want to do a couple of days down the Allagash River from there. Bypass Round Pond and do all of those other nice places. The bridge has been recently renewed. Then we got the Long Sault. The Long Sault Rapids is roughly 8 to 10 miles long, And Dad used to call it, and a lot of local people call it, the push and be damned. Your motor could be running full throttle, and you still needed a pole to keep pushing. And you were lucky if you gained a foot, or you'd lose a foot. So you'd push and be damned. Gamache Brook, some say it could be from St. Pamphile or Lac Frontier, and also it could be Cunliffe Depot had a cook named David Gamache who frequented the place and did a lot of the cooking for the outside satellite businesses and stuff. And that's the closest I could come with Gamache Brook. Whitaker Brook, big family, 10, 12 kids again. The brook itself comes out over here across from Cunliffe Island. See, Cunliffe Island is named here, but not down below. Whitaker Brook had a big family over in this area, halfway between Long Lake, the Allagash, Long Lake Dam, and Seven Islands. He had roughly 400 acres of cleared land. And I suspect where they lived up at the headwaters of the brook, that's where the title of Whitaker Brook comes in. And then above that, we have Harding Brook. Zero information on Harding. Then we come to Sweeney Brook. We've got a John Sweeney back there in the 1870s, working in the woods. And then he had a son named Tom Sweeney. Tom used to take care of Long Lake Dam. Long Lake Dam was built from Washburn, Maine, all the way across, and it stopped there, although there was a tote road all the way over to Seven Islands. It was going to join Seven Islands, and it's called the California Road because and back in those days they said that was so far that you were going to reach California if you took that road. And the hub of the St. John River at that time was Seven Islands, and the Canadians from Quebec were going to make a road from I forget the city down into Seven Islands, so that would have been the hub of our forest industry. I said earlier that a lot of the contractors, the big contractors, the main offices were in Holton. They had outreaches all over the place over here. Seven Islands is one of the biggest ones, even though the Canadians did not connect to the California Road. Then we've got Harvey Farm, right there from Harvey Pond. That was John Harvey, who raised a family of 12 or more kids. He cleared roughly 400 acres of land. And he was married to, I take that back, he lived with an Indian lady. And she had many kids, of course, but that lady gave up a son named Alvy. And I go back to Widow Blanche. She gave up a son, Widow Alvy, a son named Alvy. So what's happening here? We'll soon find out. So just above Harvey Farm, we come to Lost Popple and Sam Gelbear's campsite where he did his guiding. Lost Popple is named, Popple means a windy place. Lost Popple, because of its position in Harvey Farm, means there's no wind. So that's why they call it Lost Popple. And that's where Fred King, also famous guide, did his camping. And then they named it Lost Popple. Now Fred King also disobeyed all kinds of park protocol and stuff. So they moved him from this spot all the way up to Chamberlain Lake or something and made him happy. As we go up, the Harvey Pond is connected to Amsaskus Lake. And staying on the east side, we have Shepherd Carey Brook. Shepherd Carey was one of the biggest ones of all time. And he married one of the Whitaker daughters. And they had some family. And I was in Caribou at Carey Hospital the other day, and lo and behold, his ancestry is for whom Carey Hospital is named after. What a rude awakening for me. But yeah, the very, very big time, lot of stuff over on Seven Islands. Big, and logging of the pine and whatnot. We got the Page Camp. That's the camp that the University of Maine and Fort Kent took over. And my brothers and I, two of my brothers and I, refurbished the camp. And after it was refurbished, we only had an outdoor fireplace to build, and the camp got burned. So later in life, what happened was the university acquired some property down by Henderson Brook Bridge. And they had to go with the 1 mile limit away from the bridge to build that camp, which they did. And they named it the Senator Violet Camp. And it's not being used much anymore, that I've been told. And it was for ecological studies and forestry and so on and so forth. Myself, when it got moved to Henderson Brook, since I was involved with the parkway and stuff, I wanted it to be named after Sharon Zimmer Boucher, who was one of our best instructors here. And I thought that would have been appropriate because that's what she was teaching, and it would have been, so for me, it's called the Sharon Zimmer Boucher Camp. Okay, so then we got, again, Vin Glacier was over here. His brother Ben Glacier was down there. John was over on Glacier Lake, so they were all over the place. And then on Amsaskus Lake, come over here to Ross Lake again. This is the outlet of Ross Lake, which is Chimquasabomticook Lake. And again, we have Ross. So Ross, the first brook we came to, and now we have Ross over there. I don't know for sure if there's any relationship there. After Ross Brook, we have Gray Brook. Gotta tell you something, this Justin Gray, he had a big outfit there. He had 400 or 500 acres. He had all kinds of men. Look, they had animals and stuff. And it was, like modern day caribou or something. There was people all over the place. And these people traveled back and forth to walk from Long Lake Dam to Seven Islands, 15 miles. That was nothing for them. They'd walk at night, they'd walk in the rain. Didn't make any difference. But John Gray had a great big farm over there. And there's a brook named after him. There's a mountain named after him. There's all kinds of things named after him. And I think one of them was Alvy Casey. Alvy Casey, when you go back to Widow Blanche, I knew that his last name was Gray, Grey. And so you got Alvy Gray before he was adopted. The widow gave up Alvy, and then you have Harvey Pond, that family, they gave up an Alvy, and now you got Mr. Gray over here. I wonder if there was some connection between the households. I'm going to let you decide that mystery. Okay, so we got Gray Brook. Now we're at the American Realty Road. And one of the nice things, there's Thoroughfare Bridge that's coming into Anzaskis Lake. This is on one map, it's American Realty. On the other side, it's American Reality. It's the same road. It's like Eagle Lake with Main Street and Slab Alley. So we got Thoroughfare Bridge, we've got a ranger station over here, and then we've got Squirrel Brook, we got Drake Brook, we got a game warden camp over here where we used to stay. This is where Hal Dow and Helen Hamlin first started out with that. This is where she wrote her book. We got a Maine forestry, big fire warden house camp over here. Well, they're along the lake. Then the IP camp, which became the headquarters of the Bureau of Parks and Lands, and that building got burned. And then we come across to the American Realty, a tremendous, great big mill right there is the inlet of Piscataquis, Aroostook County lines come together. And the Chisholm Brook just edges into Piscataquis County, but it originates in Aroostook County. So we have the American Realty camp there, and that's quite something. It's deteriorated now, but as a kid I saw all these places, went to these places, had a lot of fun at a lot of these places. And that brings us from Allagash Village to the Piscataquis County Line. So, do you want me to tell you a couple of interesting stories before time is up? We okay, Ed? There, okay, here's the Moore Farm, the Taylor Farm, I'll call it now. Because the Taylor Farm, the camp is over on the riverbank, right over here. This is across the river, and this side is the east side of the river. That's where Henry and Alice built their camp and 3 sporting camps. This one is the Moore building, the original Moore building. This one is the Dan O'Leary building. This one was brought well over 1,000 feet, and they connected the 2 buildings together. Nobody was living in them. They had moved out by then. Henry had these 2 buildings together, and then he gutted the inside of both of them, and that made him his barn. That's where we stored the horses and feed the cows and pigs and all the little chores we did as children while we were there. What do you have for the next slide? Okay, well, this is the restoration of the Taylor camps. I've got some photos over in the corner there. This is the original camp that we restored. There was 3 of them, and this was the one that was most salvageable. So we restored that one. That's the front part of it. Taking a look, that's after I took the chimney. No, the chimney's still there. This kind of shows you what kind of shambles it was in. And the next one, again, from a side view, everything was growing up. We jacked this camp, put some logs underneath after we had taken the roof off and stuff, and we rolled it back 20 feet from its position because there was only like 10 feet to the riverbank in front of it. So we got permission from the Bureau of Parks and Lands, and they were happy that we could move it back. We started in 2005 and we finished in 2012. We had restrictions about when we could work and when we couldn't because of the noise, like running a chainsaw or a generator, and that was infrequent. But so all of the stuff that we did in rebuilding the camp had to be brought down from Finley Bogan. All of the purlins that were donated by Irving, all the boards for the roof and the floor and stuff was donated by Massardis Mill. Everything that we had there was all donated by generous people, and we were able to finish 1 camp. What's next? That's putting up the purling. You see how strong I am? That was in my younger days. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, and okay, that, I'm showing that the floor is now in right there. And then we're starting to build up to the point of the camp and putting in some of the purlings in place as we go along. This all has to be fixed up and torn apart and whatever. Anything else on that? There's Gary in front, shingle roof, it's all done. And now we go to the falls. A nice picture of all the ledges and whatnot over here. As we go to the falls and we go up to the top, the sheer boom pier that was at the falls was over here. As you follow this down on the edges of those rocks, there was a back channel back there, and the logs would get in there and create havoc. So they had a sheer boom built on the shore, and then they had two sheer booms blocking the back channel so that the logs wouldn't go in there. And a lot of times they'd have to dynamite. And a lot of times too, a lot of their logs back then were 40 feet long. And they were branded on both ends, just like you would, the Westerners branded their cows. They brand both ends so that if a log would go in places like that and break in half, the pressure, whoever is to receive that log downriver, whether it was in St. Francis or Van Buren, their log number was stamped, so they had that. Okay, probably we'll stop there for a second. I want to jump up to Cunliffe Depot and tell you a real story. No, next line. Cunliffe Depot, right there. See that island? Well, I took a friend who had never been up on the Allagash. Fiddleheads was my rite of spring, you know. I picked all kinds of fiddleheads at Taylor Islands and stuff. So no, I asked our babysitter when my wife and I were teaching, they were taking care of our kids, so I called him up. I says, I'm going up on the Allagash to pick some fiddleheads. Yeah, okay. I says, I'd like to leave at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'll be ready. So I stopped and picked up Norman Desjardins, and up we went. So we got there and we put in at the Ramsey campsite, and we motored across to the Ramsey Island. And when we got there, we were too early. So Norman kind of dejected. We couldn't pick any fiddleheads. I said, well, okay, let's just motor up. So we motored up to the island in front of Cunliffe Depot. I motored up the back side and probably went in about here. Hey, there was fiddleheads like crazy. Never saw the like. Just prime, big. And we had 27 50-pound onion bags with us. We landed there. It was probably 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, and we started picking. And about 1 o'clock, we stopped to have a lunch. We had 20 bags picked. So we have our lunch, and we had 7 bags to go. I said, okay, Norm, where do you want to go? Oh, he said, I'll go towards the head. He said, I saw a whole bunch up there. I said, okay, I'm going to go right to the riverside. So we go to the riverside, and I start picking. I was in a swale like this, and the riverbank was right there. And I was picking away. And all of a sudden, I heard the darndest noise coming down the river. It was unreal. I look up by the ice bridge. Here comes a canoe. 4 canoes come around the corner. 2 women in each canoe. Everyone stark naked. Oh my God. The fiddlehead started unfurling. So I hurried up. I went and got Norm and had him come down. And we got into our little peeping Tom nest. They were having so much fun, splashing one another, singing, and hitting canoes against one another and stuff. They went by us not having a clue we were there. They ended up at the depot campsite. So Norm and I finished picking our 7 bags of fiddleheads. Around 3 o'clock we loaded up. So instead of starting the motor, because they had stopped at the campsite, I pulled up in back of the island, and when I hit the main river, I grabbed the paddle and I started paddling. And as we come down, I mean, we were like 200 feet. They had set up some tents. They had a fire going. They were cooking. They were still stark naked. So as we come by, one of them yells out, "Are you guys coming ashore?" And I yelled, no, we're not. We've seen enough. As I hit the main channel to drop the motor in, just before I dropped the motor in, I said to Norm in French, I says, "Norm, what do you think of that?" Holy Christ, Mel. I never saw so many fiddleheads in my life. I'll go back to Big Brook, something that's been very part of my life since I was going on the Allagash. Between Big Brook and McKean Brook, there was a pine tree that was dead. That towered 50, 75 feet over the evergreens. I mean, it was humongous, really big. On top of that dry pine was an eagle's nest, probably 8 foot in diameter. So one day we were motoring up and we begged Dad, "Stop the motor, take us over to the pine." So it was only a couple 100 feet in off the riverbank. We went, you should have seen the bones that were accumulated there from all of the animals that they had killed to feed their young. But we are the pine tree state. That tall pine, it probably disappeared late 60s. It fell over. But that pine always stuck with me, and being the pine tree state, I've always had an interest in pine trees. Shepherd Carey, Bill Cunliffe, Seven Islands Land Company, all of the Bob Godding from Holton and stuff. Many of you know and have heard of the King's Pine that were marked for the masts. And I often wondered, how did they get that? Well, the northern rivers, they're driven down on the log drives. But how would they get a big log like that to the riverbank? Well, that's where they invented bobsleds. And those come from Bobby Godding out of Holton, who invented the bobsleds. A ton pine was hewed out at 1 foot by 1 foot square, 40 feet long, weighed approximately a ton. A 5-ton pine, 5 feet by 5 feet, 40 foot long. And back then, because there was so many, they were using oxen to pull them. As many as a team of 10 pairs of oxen to get those to the shoreline to flip them. What I did find out is those are only 40 feet long. That's not much of a mast. They were cutting some that were 80 feet long. And at 80 feet long, the dimension was still 3 foot round. They would start at that point and hand hew that to the top of the mast at 1 foot by 1 foot. That 80-footer became the king's, or the mast on the king's ships. And that was really intriguing for me to find out about the 1-ton pine, the 5-ton pine, and the masts and everything. Back in the late 1800s, there would be approximately 200 one-ton pine cut on either of the two rivers, and there would be approximately 50 to 75 5-ton pine, and those were hand-hewed, squared up by hand. Also on those pine, the average age would have been 600 to 800 years old. It's amazing that we had that kind of trees around here and everything else. Anything else you want to hear?
I have a couple of questions.
There's so many.
I have a couple of questions.
Oh, go ahead.
Just hearing your story, which is it's amazing that you have all this information in your head, and you shared it so well this evening. But from all of these families that you've talked about, and you have all of these families that had 10, 15, 22 children, what's the population of Allagash today?
Less than 200, right around 200.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
well, the population everywhere
Yeah.
is like that, you know.
Yeah.
We've lost our population completely.
Yeah.
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 Anybody else have any questions? Anybody,
Mel, if you know if,
go ahead.
Was there another camp on Amsaskis Lake?
There's several camps. Yes, oh, and I forgot there was a schoolhouse there too.
Boston had a camp there, right?
Cash Austin had a camp there. Yes, and Levi Dow had a camp there. Yeah.
I remember seeing his.
Yes, it was the Pauquettes. That was a big family again, 14 kids. And Janine Pauquette wrote about the history of the Pauquettes that lived at near the reality mill on Amsaskis. And Louis Pauquette is the one who petitioned the commissioner for education, and they were able to get a school there for 14 kids. And the school lasted 14 years. There was 4 different teachers at that time. Helen Hamlin did not teach there. She taught up at Churchill at that school up there before that's when she met Curly and married him. But yeah, the Pauquettes, they used to deliver the mail when we lived at 9 Mile. So yeah. Okay, you want to try that? There's a Wongan boat, and that's the Hilliard pole. You don't see it that well. There's Dad at Long Lake Dam, 1975. He's 75 years old.
Wow.
He's guiding National Geographic. That's where that photo comes from. That photo was used for the documentary the North Runner. It's about a 35-minute documentary on the Allagash River. Sam Abel was in the canoe in the bow, and he was taking a photo of a Dad coming through. And while I think of it, there's a sheer boom on that side of the dam. Now, the dam is completely gone. It went out in 1954, 55, according to Lee and Jarndro. And he had gone to fish with Frank Hart at Long Lake Dam that morning. And then he came down into the Squirrel Pocket, and while they were fishing in the Squirrel Pocket, the logs from the dam were going by. So Dad did 2 trips with National Geographic, and this is we have quite a few of these photos. And talking about Squirrel Pocket too, before we go to our next pictures, when we would go to the game warden camp at Round Pond, Uncle Marvin Edstrand from Caribou was married to Dad's youngest sister, and we'd go up there and fish and stuff. But with Uncle Marvin, he had us go across the pond with him one time and get into Squirrel Pocket. There's a whole bunch of lily pads all over the place, and behold, on those lily pads are frogs the size of chickens. So we put a little red flannel on our hook and go like that and catch us a frog, take his hind legs off, get rid of him, keep the legs, and go back to the camp and frog down. It was quite something. Now, do you know how Frenchmen got their nickname of frogs? When the boats were coming over from France, at first, a lot of people were dying of different illnesses, so they thought it was the water. So when they left France, they started putting frogs in the water. If the frog died, they wouldn't drink the water. And that's what they came across the ocean with. So the Frenchmen were named frogs by the English for doing that with their frogs. There's a nice article in Echoes. I don't remember exactly which issue, but yeah, there's a good article in Echoes about that. Kind of interesting. We have another one? Oh, this is coming into the Taylor farm from Finley Bogan. The guy in the boat with me is Jerry Swopes. We were taking, in the red canoe is Gary with Big Red, and Edgecombe, can't remember her first name. She's the writer and he was the photographer, and you can see how shallow the water is. But right over here, that's where Henry used to cross with his car. He had a car and he'd come across, go up towards this point over here, and always stay in the shallow water to get to his landing. And then after the Parkway took over the Taylor farm, right over here right up here by Little McKinnon Brook, he built a camp there. And he could stay there in the summertime, but in the wintertime, he and Alice bought a camp on St. Croix Lake, and that's where they lived. But this is one of the last of the islands. Most of the islands are all down below us. And on these islands, gang, there was turtles like crazy. One time, Memorial Weekend, our family went up to Finley Bogan, put 2 canoes in. We went down to the main island that we normally pick off of. We started picking. And we'd pick enough right off. Mom would start cleaning them. Dad would get a spun hungan going, and we'd boil the kettle and everything, and she'd cook the fiddleheads while we were still picking. While we were picking, you'd find a turtle here, you'd find a turtle there. Go over there, there's a turtle. So one day we were there, and Dad decided to go down and check the Allagash Falls. So he and Mom and Jane went down to the falls, and while they were gone, we finished picking the fiddlehead bags that we had brought with us. They were used to be 100-pound flour bags, and sometimes we even wore those as clothes. But we'd fill those bags, probably 10, 15 of them. So we got done picking, and we were waiting for Mom and Dad to come back, so we'd all be together. So we decided, let's go find some turtles. So we'd go find a turtle somewhere, and we'd take a stick, we'd drive it in the mud, put the turtle on top. And when Mom and Dad come back, we had 75 turtles lined up on the bank. And today, in that picture right there, right after that picture was taken, Gary yelled, "Look at the turtle on the rock." There's a big rock over in the corner here. And it was sunbathing, for crying out loud. With the turtles, it was very common to flip them over and see an inscription. Joe's Jack, 1874. Jim's John. It was all kinds of names carved into the turtles, and usually a date, 1896, 1905. That's something we never did as children or anything, but my son was up at Round Pond with Danny Medor, and they found a turtle, and Dan made an inscription, "Dan loves Dan." So if you ever find a turtle around the squirrel pocket that says "Dan loves Dan," that's where that comes from. Any other questions or concerns?
We have a couple more slides.
Oh, yes.
Now we get into the
Now we get into the family. This was taken in 1947. And the background there is, well, that's me, Roland, Lenny, Gary, Dad, and my mother, Bertha. This is the corner of the camp. This is of Helen Hamlin fame, 9 Mile Bridge. The bridge is right there, on top of Dad's head right there. And that's part of the framework starting over on this side and this side over here. And that was right there, that was a wall of logs put together to hold the gravel to the entrance of 9 Mile Bridge. We spent a lot of time there, and one of the things, I see Dad's arms there, and he was wicked strong. The reason why this picture was taken in 1947. In 1939, when they hired Dad as a game warden, he'd been doing part-time work in the Fish River chain, taking the eggs out of salmon to send to the fish hatcheries and stuff. And he was down in Long Lake, and that's where he met my mother. I think he was netting Mum more than he was netting the salmon. But anyway.